The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the small cottage kitchen, casting dancing shadows across the worn wooden table, where Kate sat with her hands wrapped around a cooling cup of tea. She stared at the letter that had arrived 3 days ago, its official letterhead now crumpled from her nervous fingers, reading and rereading the same devastating words. William would be leaving in 2 weeks for his deployment overseas, and this time, they both knew it would be different. Kate had met William 5 years earlier at the local community center where she volunteered teaching art classes to elderly residents. He had walked in that Tuesday afternoon, his military uniform crisp and his smile hesitant, looking for information about visiting hours for his grandfather, who had recently moved into the assisted living facility next door. She was cleaning paintbrushes at the time, her own clothes splattered with watercolors, when she looked up and saw this tall, gentle man standing awkwardly in the doorway. Their conversation that day lasted only 10 minutes, but something had sparked between them. William started volunteering at the center, too, helping with the veterans support group that met every Thursday evening. Kate would stay late on those nights, organizing supplies in the art room while listening to the sound of his voice drifting down the hallway as he shared stories and listened to the older men talk about their own military experiences. Their first real conversation happened during a particularly emotional veterans meeting. Kate had been walking past when she heard raised voices and saw William trying to calm down an agitated elderly man who was having what appeared to be a panic attack. Without thinking, she had stepped in with a glass of water and her naturally soothing presence, helping to ground the veteran until his breathing returned to normal. Afterward, William had found her in the art room, his eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. They started meeting for coffee after the Thursday sessions, then weekend walks through the park, then quiet dinners at the small Italian restaurant downtown where the owner, Mrs. Romano, had taken a special liking to them and always saved their favorite corner table. William would tell Kate about his childhood, growing up as the son of a career military officer who was gone more often than he was home. He spoke about the loneliness of constantly moving, never quite fitting in anywhere, until he found his purpose in serving others. Kate shared her own story of growing up in this small town, caring for her mother who had battled cancer for 3 long years before finally losing the fight when Kate was 22. She had stayed in town after her mother's death, unable to leave the place that held so many memories, working at the local library and volunteering at the community center because helping others made the empty house feel less hollow. Their relationship had deepened slowly, built on shared quiet moments and understanding glances. William was different from any man Kate had ever known. He listened when she spoke, really listened, his blue eyes focused entirely on her, as if her words were the most important thing in the world. He brought her flowers not because it was expected, but because he had noticed her admiring the wildflowers that grew along their walking path. He remembered that she took her coffee with just a splash of cream and preferred rainy afternoons to sunny ones, because the sound of rain on the roof reminded her of reading with her mother. Kate had fallen in love with his gentleness, the way he treated everyone with respect, regardless of their station in life. She had watched him spend an entire afternoon helping Mrs. Patterson from the library reorganize her attic, asking for nothing in return except her stories about the town's history. She had seen him stop his car to help a stranded motorist change a tire in the rain, coming home soaked but smiling because he had been able to help. These were the moments that had captured her heart completely. When William received his orders for his first deployment 18 months into their relationship, Kate had been terrified but supportive. They had spent that last week before he left creating memories, taking photographs and making promises. The 3 months he was gone had felt like years, but they had written letters every day and talked whenever possible. When he returned, thinner but with the same gentle smile, Kate had realized that what they had was worth fighting for, worth the fear and the uncertainty. They had moved in together 6 months after his return, renting the small cottage on Maple Street with its tiny garden and creaky floors that William promised to fix, but never quite got around to. Kate didn't mind. She loved the way the old house settled and sighed around them, the way William would unconsciously reach for her hand while they watched movies on the worn sofa, the way he sang off-key in the shower every morning while she made coffee. Their life together had been simple but deeply satisfying. William worked at the local base during the week, helping train new recruits and managing logistics, while Kate had taken a position teaching art at the elementary school. Their evenings were spent cooking dinner together, reading on the front porch, or taking long walks through the neighborhood, while William pointed out all the repairs their various neighbors needed and volunteering to help with weekend projects. Kate had never felt so settled, so at peace with her life. For the first time since her mother's death, she could imagine a real future, one filled with the possibility of marriage and children and growing old together in this house they were slowly making their own. William had hinted at such a future too, in the way he talked about someday expanding the garden, in his careful questions about what kind of wedding she might want, in the way he had started referring to when we have kids, instead of if we have kids. But now everything was about to change again. This deployment wasn't like the others. This one was for 15 months minimum, possibly longer depending on the situation overseas. The location was more dangerous, the mission more complex. William had tried to explain it to her gently, holding her hands across their kitchen table while the dinner she had cooked grew cold. But Kate had seen the worry in his eyes even as he tried to reassure her. The worst part was that they couldn't talk about when he would be back. The uncertainty hung over them like a storm cloud, making every moment feel precious and fragile. William had thrown himself into preparations, staying late at the base to complete training and briefings, while Kate had tried to maintain normalcy by continuing her teaching and volunteer work. But the elephant in the room grew larger every day, and they both felt the weight of impending separation pressing down on them. Kate had been strong for him, or at least she had tried to be. When William came home exhausted from particularly difficult days of preparation, she would have his favorite meal ready and listen while he talked through his concerns about the mission and his responsibilities to the men under his command. When he woke up in the middle of the night from stress dreams, she would hold him without asking questions, stroking his hair until his breathing slowed and he fell back asleep. But alone during the day, while William was at the base and her students were at recess, Kate allowed herself to feel the full weight of her fear. She was terrified of losing him, not just to the dangers of his mission, but to the way deployment changed people. She had seen it in some of the veterans at the community center, the way certain experiences left invisible scars that never quite healed. What if William came back different? What if 15 months apart was too long for their relationship to survive? The letter on the table contained his final orders and travel arrangements. In 5 days, he would report for final processing. In 2 weeks, he would be gone. Kate picked up the letter again, even though she had memorized every word, and tried to imagine what life would look like without William's quiet presence filling their home. The front door opened and closed softly, followed by the familiar sound of William's boots on the hardwood floor. Kate quickly folded the letter and wiped her eyes, not wanting him to see how much she had been crying. But when he appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his uniform with his hair slightly mussed from the wind, she knew immediately that he could tell she had been upset. William didn't say anything at first. He simply crossed the small kitchen and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest while she breathed in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the fresh air from outside. They stood there for a long moment, both of them trying to memorize the feeling of being together and safe in their own kitchen, while the late afternoon sun painted everything in golden light. "I've been thinking," William said finally, his voice quiet against her hair. "Maybe we should start planning something special for these last 2 weeks. Not just sitting around being sad about what's coming, but really making some memories. Kate pulled back enough to look at his face, seeing the same mixture of love and sadness that she knew must be reflected in her own eyes. What kind of memories? I don't know yet, he admitted, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear in the gesture that always made her heart skip. But I want to do this right, Kate. I want these 2 weeks to be something we can both hold on to. That evening, they sat on their front porch with cups of hot chocolate and a notebook, making a list of everything they wanted to do together before William left. Some ideas were simple, like having breakfast in bed on Sunday morning and taking photographs in the garden. Others were more elaborate, like driving to the coast for a weekend or finally taking that cooking class at the community college they had been talking about for months. As they wrote, Kate felt some of the heavy sadness in her chest beginning to lift, replaced by a bittersweet anticipation. They couldn't control what was coming, but they could control how they spent their remaining time together. They could choose to focus on love instead of fear, on connection instead of separation. By the time they went to bed that night, they had filled 3 pages with ideas and were laughing together for the first time in weeks about William's suggestion that they try to learn ballroom dancing from YouTube videos in their living room. Kate fell asleep, curled against William's side, listening to his heartbeat and feeling more hopeful than she had since the deployment letter arrived. The next morning, they started their list with breakfast in bed. William surprising Kate with perfectly scrambled eggs and toast cut into heart shapes. They spent the afternoon in the garden, planting bulbs that would bloom in the spring while William was away, each flower a promise that he would come home to see them grow. That evening, they attempted the YouTube ballroom dancing with disastrous but hilarious results, laughing until their stomachs hurt as they stumbled over each other's feet in their tiny living room. Over the following days, they worked their way through their list with determined joy. They drove to the lake where they had shared their first kiss and had a picnic while watching the sunset. They spent an entire Saturday visiting all of their favorite places in town, taking photographs and sharing memories at each location. William bought Kate a small silver locket at the antique shop downtown and helped her choose which photograph of them to put inside. They cooked elaborate dinners together, trying recipes they had never attempted before and laughing over their failures as much as celebrating their successes. William taught Kate how to change the oil in her car, something he had been meaning to do for months, while Kate showed him how to properly organize his military gear using techniques she had learned from organizing her art supplies. But even in their happiest moments, the countdown was always there. 14 days became 10, then 7, then 4. The weight of approaching separation colored everything, making even simple moments feel intense and precious. Kate found herself studying William's face while he read the morning paper, trying to memorize the exact shade of blue in his eyes and the way his mouth quirked up when he found something amusing. William seemed to be doing the same thing, his gaze lingering on Kate in quiet moments as if he were trying to store up images of her to carry with him. He started taking more photographs, claiming he wanted to document their last week together, but Kate noticed that most of the pictures were of her, caught in unguarded moments while she was cooking or reading or simply sitting in their garden. 3 days before William was scheduled to leave, they drove to the coast for their weekend getaway. They stayed in a small bed and breakfast overlooking the ocean, spending hours walking on the beach and talking about everything except the deployment. The salt air and the sound of waves seemed to wash away some of their sadness, replacing it with a profound appreciation for what they had shared and would continue to share despite the distance that was coming. On their last night at the coast, they sat on the beach watching stars appear in the darkening sky while waves crashed gently nearby. William had been unusually quiet all evening, and Kate could sense that he was working up to saying something important. Finally, as the moon rose over the water, he turned to face her. "Kate," he began, his voice unsteady, in a way she had never heard before. "I need you to know something before I leave." Kate felt her heart rate increase, uncertain what was coming but aware that this moment was significant. "What is it?" William reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, his hands shaking slightly as he opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring that caught the moonlight and seemed to glow against the dark velvet. Kate gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she realized what was happening. "I know the timing isn't perfect," William said quickly, his words tumbling over each other in his nervousness. "I know I should have done this weeks ago, before we knew about the deployment, but I couldn't leave without asking you, Kate. I couldn't leave without you knowing that I want to spend the rest of my life with you, that coming home to you is what's going to get me through the next 15 months. Kate stared at the ring, then at William's earnest face, feeling her heart break and soar simultaneously. This was everything she had dreamed of, but the timing made it almost unbearably bittersweet. "William," she whispered. "You don't have to answer right now if you're not ready," he said hurriedly. "I know this complicates everything, with me leaving and not knowing exactly when I'll be back. But I love you, Kate. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person, and I needed you to know that. I needed you to know that no matter what happens over there, you're my future. You're my home." Kate looked into his eyes, seeing all the love and hope and fear that she felt reflected back at her. This man had become her entire world over the past 5 years, had shown her what real love looked like, had made her believe in the possibility of happiness again after so much loss. The thought of being his wife filled her with joy, even as the thought of him leaving filled her with terror. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." William's face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen from him as he slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. They kissed as the waves crashed around them and the stars shone overhead, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. They were engaged, finally and officially promised to each other, but in 2 days he would be gone, and they had no idea when they would see each other again. That night they lay awake in their bed at the inn, Kate's head on William's chest as she twisted her new ring around her finger, both of them too overwhelmed by emotion and the magnitude of what had just happened to sleep. They talked about their wedding, making tentative plans for when William returned, trying to focus on the future they would build together rather than the immediate separation they were facing. The drive home the next morning was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts as the familiar landscape passed by. Kate kept looking at her ring, amazed by how something so small could represent something so enormous. William drove with one hand on the steering wheel and the other holding hers, as if he couldn't bear to break the physical connection between them, even for the practical necessity of driving. Their last full day together passed in a blur of final preparations and quiet moments. William finished packing his gear while Kate sat nearby, ostensibly reading but really just watching him move around their bedroom with the efficient motions of someone who had done this many times before. They had dinner at Mrs. Romano's restaurant, where the kind owner had decorated their usual table with flowers and insisted on bringing them champagne to celebrate their engagement, even though Kate's smile felt forced and William seemed distracted. That final evening, they sat together on their front porch swing, Kate curled up against William's side as they watched their neighbor's children play in the fading light. Neither of them spoke much, both sensing that words were inadequate for what they were feeling. Instead, they simply held each other and tried to memorize the feeling of being together and safe in the place they had made their own. As bedtime approached, they both moved slowly, reluctant to let the day end because morning would bring the beginning of goodbye. They brushed their teeth side by side at the bathroom sink, caught each other's eyes in the mirror, and shared a look of such profound sadness that Kate felt tears spring to her eyes, despite her determination to be strong. In bed, they held each other without speaking, Kate's head on William's shoulder as his fingers traced gentle patterns on her arm. Neither of them slept much, both too aware that this was their last night together for more than a year, both trying to memorize the feeling of the other person's warmth and breathing and familiar presence. When the alarm clock went off at 5:30 the next morning, signaling that it was time for William to report for final processing, they both lay still for a long moment before William finally reached over to turn it off. The moment they had been dreading for 2 weeks had finally arrived, and neither of them was ready to face it. The silence in their bedroom felt heavy and final as William and Kate lay motionless, listening to the alarm clock's echoes fade away. Through the thin curtains, Kate could see that it was still dark outside, with only the faintest hint of dawn beginning to touch the horizon. She had imagined this moment so many times over the past 2 weeks, but now that it was here, she felt completely unprepared for the reality of it. William was the first to move, sitting up slowly and running his hands through his hair in the gesture Kate had grown to love over their years together. She watched the familiar movements of his morning routine as if seeing them for the first time, knowing it would be more than a year before she witnessed them again. Every small action seemed magnified and precious. "I should shower," William said quietly, his voice rough with sleep and emotion. Kate nodded, not trusting herself to speak yet. She watched him gather his things and disappear into the bathroom, then lay back against his pillow and breathed in his scent from the pillowcase, trying to memorize it. The sound of the shower running filled the house, and Kate forced herself to get up and make coffee, needing something normal to focus on. Her hands shook as she measured the grounds, and she found herself making enough for 2 people out of habit before realizing that after today, she would be drinking her morning coffee alone for the foreseeable future. When William emerged from the bathroom, already dressed in his uniform, Kate felt her breath catch in her throat. He looked so handsome and official, but also somehow distant, as if he was already beginning to mentally prepare himself for leaving. She handed him a cup of coffee and they stood in their kitchen, both of them aware that this was the last time they would share this simple morning ritual for many months to come. "I should eat something," William said, though he made no move toward the refrigerator. Kate realized he was as reluctant as she was to begin the final sequence of events that would lead to his departure. She opened the refrigerator and stared at its contents, unable to decide what would constitute an appropriate last breakfast. "Eggs," she suggested weakly. William nodded and sat at their small kitchen table while Kate moved automatically through the motions of cooking, grateful to have something to do with her hands. She made scrambled eggs the way he liked them, with cheese and herbs from their garden and toast from the homemade bread she had baked 2 days earlier in a burst of nervous energy. They ate in relative silence, both of them picking at their food without much appetite. Kate found herself studying William's face across the table, noting the way the early morning light highlighted the strong line of his jaw and the gentle curve of his mouth. She wanted to say something meaningful, something that would convey all the love and hope and fear in her heart, but words seemed insufficient. "I put extra toiletries in your bag," she said finally, because practical matters felt safer than emotional ones. "And I packed that book you were reading in case you get a chance to finish it." "Thank you," William replied, and something in his tone made Kate look up to find him watching her with such intense love and sadness that she felt tears spring to her eyes despite her determination to be strong for him. They finished breakfast without speaking much more. Then William excused himself to do a final check of his gear while Kate cleaned up the kitchen. She washed their dishes slowly, trying to make the mundane task last as long as possible, but eventually everything was clean and put away, and there was nothing left to do but face the inevitable. William's bags were lined up by the front door, looking official and ominous. He would be driving himself to the base, where he would join his unit for final processing before departing for the airport. Kate had offered to drive him, but he had gently refused, saying it would be easier for both of them if they said goodbye at home, in the place that belonged to them. At 7 o'clock, they stood facing each other in their living room, both of them at a loss for how to begin saying goodbye. William reached for Kate's hands, holding them gently while he looked into her eyes with an expression so tender and heartbroken that she felt her careful composure beginning to crumble. "I love you," he said simply, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I love you more than I have ever loved anything in my life, and I want you to remember that every single day while I'm gone." Kate nodded, not trusting herself to speak yet. William continued, his thumbs stroking gently over her knuckles as he spoke. "I know this is going to be hard, probably harder than we can imagine right now. There are going to be days when you feel like you can't do it anymore, when the missing me becomes too much to bear. But I need you to remember that every single day I'm away is one day closer to coming home to you." "I know," Kate managed to whisper, her voice thick with tears she was trying not to shed. "And I need you to live your life while I'm gone," William continued, his voice becoming more urgent. "Don't put everything on hold waiting for me. Keep teaching, keep volunteering at the community center, keep being the amazing woman I fell in love with. Promise me you won't disappear while I'm away." Kate took a shaky breath, understanding what he was asking of her and why. "I promise," she said, meaning it even though she couldn't imagine how she would keep such a promise in the lonely months ahead. William lifted one hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts. "We're going to get married when I come home," he said firmly, as if stating it as fact could make it true. "We're going to have the wedding you've always wanted, and we're going to start our life together. And this deployment is going to become just a story we tell about how we got through the hard times together." Kate leaned into his touch, closing her eyes and trying to memorize the feeling of his hand against her cheek. "I love you too," she said, finally finding her voice. "I love you so much that it scares me sometimes. And I'm going to love you every day while you're gone, and I'm going to be right here waiting when you come home." They kissed then. A kiss that was tender and desperate and full of all the words they couldn't say. Kate poured all of her love into it, all of her hopes and fears and promises, while William held her as if he could protect her from all the lonely days ahead through the strength of his embrace alone. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying openly. William rested his forehead against hers, and they stood there breathing together, trying to make this moment last forever. "I have to go," he said finally, the words coming out broken and reluctant. Kate nodded, knowing it was true but hating it with every fiber of her being. "I know." William picked up his bags, then turned back to Kate one more time. She looked so small and beautiful and heartbroken standing in their living room, wearing the blue sweater he had bought her for Christmas and the engagement ring that caught the morning light streaming through their windows. He wanted to drop everything and stay, wanted to tell his commanding officers that he couldn't leave this woman who had become his whole world. But duty called, and they both knew that this separation was necessary, even if it felt like the hardest thing either of them had ever had to endure. William opened the front door, then paused on the threshold. "Kate," he said, turning back one final time. "Yes? Take care of my garden while I'm gone?" Kate smiled through her tears, remembering all the weekends they had spent together planting and weeding and nurturing their small patch of earth. "Of course. And take care of yourself. Please." "I will." William nodded, then walked quickly to his car without looking back, knowing that if he saw Kate's face again, he might not have the strength to leave. Kate stood in the doorway watching as he loaded his bags into the trunk, then slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. He backed out of their driveway slowly, and Kate raised her hand in a wave that she hoped conveyed all the love and support she couldn't put into words. William waved back, and then he was driving down Maple Street and out of sight, leaving Kate standing alone in the doorway of their empty house. The silence that followed his departure was unlike anything Kate had ever experienced. The house seemed to echo with his absence, every corner and surface suddenly too quiet and too empty. She stood in the doorway for a long time after his car had disappeared, as if waiting might somehow bring him back. Finally, when the morning air became too cold to bear, Kate went back inside and closed the door behind her. The house felt enormous and strange without William's presence, and she found herself moving from room to room aimlessly, unsure what to do with herself now that the moment she had been dreading for weeks had finally passed. In the kitchen, William's coffee cup still sat on the table, and Kate found herself reluctant to clear it away, as if doing so would somehow make his departure more real. She left it there and wandered into the living room, where the indent from his body was still visible on the couch cushions, and his favorite book lay open on the coffee table. The bedroom was the hardest to face. The bed was unmade from their restless night, and William's pillow still held the impression of his head. Kate sat on her side of the bed and picked up his pillow, holding it against her chest and breathing in his lingering scent while tears she had been holding back for hours finally flowed freely. She cried for what felt like hours, mourning not just William's physical absence, but the sudden change in her entire world. For 5 years he had been her constant companion, her partner in all the small decisions and big dreams that made up their shared life. Now she would have to navigate everything alone, from choosing what to have for dinner to making decisions about their future wedding plans. Eventually, the tears subsided, leaving Kate feeling drained but somehow clearer. She looked around their bedroom and made a decision that surprised her with its firmness. She would not wallow. She would miss William terribly, would count every day until his return, but she would also honor his request that she live her life while he was gone. Kate got up and made the bed carefully, smoothing out the comforter and arranging the pillows the way William liked them. Then she showered and dressed for work, applying makeup to hide the evidence of her tears and choosing one of her favorite dresses because William had once told her it made her eyes look beautiful. At school that morning, Kate threw herself into her teaching with an intensity that surprised her students. She organized new art projects, rearranged the classroom supplies, and spent extra time with each child during their painting session. The familiar routine of teaching was soothing, and she found that focusing on her students' needs helped quiet the aching sadness in her chest. During lunch, she called her best friend Sarah, who had been her closest confidant throughout her relationship with William. Sarah listened patiently as Kate described the morning's goodbye, offering comfort and practical support in equal measure. "You're stronger than you think," Sarah told her. "I've watched you get through losing your mother and starting over in this town. You can get through this too." "It feels different," Kate admitted. "When my mother died, the pain was awful, but it was also final. I knew I had to learn to live without her. This feels like holding my breath for 15 months, waiting for my life to start again." "Then don't hold your breath," Sarah said gently. "Keep living. Keep breathing. That's what he wants for you, and it's what you need for yourself, too." That afternoon, Kate stopped by the community center where she had first met William. Mrs. Henderson, the director, greeted her warmly and asked about William's deployment. Kate found herself telling the story of his departure, surprised by how much it helped to put the experience into words for someone who cared about them both. "You're welcome to pick up some extra volunteer hours while he's gone," Mrs. Henderson offered. "I know staying busy helps some people cope with separation." Kate accepted gratefully, realizing that she would need structure and purpose to fill the long evenings that stretched ahead. She signed up to help with the evening literacy program and the weekend meals for elderly residents, activities that would keep her connected to the community she and William had built together. That evening, Kate cooked dinner for the first time in years, making a simple pasta dish and eating it at their kitchen table while reading a book. The silence felt oppressive at first, but gradually she began to appreciate the opportunity to focus entirely on the story without the pleasant distraction of William's presence. After dinner, she called William's number, not expecting him to answer since he was still in final processing, but hoping to leave a voicemail that would be waiting for him when he had access to his phone again. His familiar greeting played, and Kate found herself smiling for the first time all day as she listened to his recorded voice. "Hi, it's me," she said after the beep. "I know you probably can't call back yet, but I wanted you to know that I'm okay. I missed you terribly today, but I also kept my promise. I went to work, I taught my students, I volunteered at the center. I even made plans to take on extra volunteer hours while you're gone. Mrs. Henderson sends her love, by the way, and Mr. Patterson from the library asked me to tell you to be careful over there. I think half the town is going to be looking out for me while you're away, which is both sweet and embarrassing. I love you, and I hope your first day went smoothly. Call me when you can." As the days passed, Kate began to establish new routines that helped her cope with William's absence. She woke up earlier to spend time in their garden, tending to the plants they had put in together and adding new ones that would bloom when he returned. She joined the community center's book club, started taking evening walks with Sarah, and began planning their wedding in a notebook she kept by her bedside. The hardest moments came unexpectedly throughout each day. She would reach for her phone to share some small, amusing incident with William before remembering he wasn't available. She would automatically buy his favorite coffee creamer at the grocery store before realizing she wouldn't need it. She would wake up in the middle of the night reaching for him, only to find empty space where he should have been. But there were also unexpected moments of strength and growth. Kate found herself making decisions more quickly, trusting her own judgment in ways she hadn't when she could rely on William's input. She discovered new interests and friendships through her expanded volunteer work. She began writing in a journal, documenting not just her daily activities but also her thoughts and feelings about their relationship and her hopes for their future together. 3 weeks after William's departure, Kate received her first letter from him. She recognized his handwriting immediately and sat in their garden to read it, surrounded by the flowers they had planted together. His words were full of love and longing, but also descriptions of his new surroundings and the men he was working with. He wrote about missing her morning coffee and the way she hummed while she cooked, about thinking of her every time he saw a sunset or heard music playing. Most importantly, he wrote about how proud he was of her for keeping her promise to live her life while he was away. He had spoken to Mrs. Henderson during a brief phone call and learned about Kate's expanded volunteer work and her new activities. His pride in her strength and independence came through clearly in his words, and Kate felt a surge of confidence that surprised her with its intensity. That night, Kate wrote her first letter back to William, filling 4 pages with details about her days, her thoughts about their garden, and her excitement about planning their wedding. She wrote about the new art project she was developing for her students and the elderly man at the community center who had been teaching her to play chess. Most importantly, she wrote about how much she loved and missed him, but also about how she was learning to be okay on her own. As she sealed the letter and prepared it for mailing, Kate realized something had shifted inside her over the past 3 weeks. The acute pain of William's departure had softened into a steady ache that she was learning to carry without being crushed by its weight. She missed him terribly and counted the days until his return, but she was also discovering strengths and interests she hadn't known she possessed. Looking at her engagement ring in the lamplight, Kate made herself a promise that she would honor both her love for William and her own growth during their time apart. She would continue building a life that was rich and meaningful on its own, so that when William returned, they could bring two complete individuals together rather than two halves seeking wholeness through each other. The months ahead would be difficult, filled with lonely nights and aching moments of missing him. But Kate was beginning to believe that she could not only survive this separation, but emerge from it stronger and more confident in herself and their love. Their quiet goodbye had been heart-wrenching to watch and even harder to live through, but it had also been the beginning of a new chapter in their story together. Standing at her bedroom window and looking out at their garden in the moonlight, Kate whispered goodnight to William, wherever he was in the world, then settled into bed with her journal and began writing about her dreams for their reunion and the marriage they would build when this separation finally came to an end. 14 months and 17 days after William's departure, Kate stood in front of their bedroom mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she applied lipstick with unusual care. The phone call had come 3 days earlier, crackling with static from overseas, but carrying the most beautiful words she had heard in over a year. "I'm coming home." William's deployment had been extended twice, each delay feeling like a fresh wound, but now he was finally returning. The house around Kate buzzed with nervous energy and anticipation. She had spent the past week cleaning every surface until it gleamed, rearranging furniture and replacing worn items, trying to make their home perfect for William's homecoming. Fresh flowers from their garden, now a much larger and more elaborate space than when he had left, filled every room with color and fragrance. The garden had become Kate's sanctuary during the lonely months, expanding from their small original plot to encompass most of their backyard. Kate caught sight of herself in the mirror and paused. The woman looking back at her was familiar, but changed. Her hair was longer now, falling past her shoulders in gentle waves that William had never seen. Her face looked older, more confident somehow, marked by the experiences of the past 14 months. She was wearing a blue dress that William had never seen before, one she had bought specifically for his return, because she wanted to look beautiful for him, but also wanted him to see that she had continued living and growing while he was away. The changes in Kate went much deeper than her appearance. The shy, somewhat dependent woman who had clung to William for emotional security had evolved into someone who knew her own strength. During his deployment, she had been promoted to head of the art department at her school, had spearheaded a successful fundraising campaign for the community center, and had even traveled solo to visit Sarah, who had moved to another state for a new job. Each accomplishment had built her confidence, layer by layer, until she barely recognized the uncertain person she had been before William's departure. The sound of a car door closing in their driveway made Kate's heart leap into her throat. She looked out the bedroom window and saw a military transport vehicle parked in front of their house. And there was William, climbing out with his duffel bags and looking exactly like her dreams, except somehow more real and substantial than memory had allowed. She watched him pause on their front walkway and look up at the house with an expression of wonder and homecoming that brought tears to her eyes. Kate ran downstairs, her carefully planned composure completely abandoned as she fumbled with the front door lock in her haste to reach him. When the door finally opened, she found William standing on their porch with his hand raised to knock, and for a moment they simply stared at each other, both overwhelmed by the reality of being in the same place again after so many months of separation. William looked leaner than when he had left, his face more weathered, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of experiences Kate could only imagine. His hair was shorter than she remembered, and there was something different in his posture, a wariness that hadn't been there before. But his eyes, when they met hers, held all the love and longing she had carried in her heart through every day of his absence. "Kate," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "You're here," she whispered, still not quite believing it. "You're really here." William dropped his bags and stepped forward, and suddenly Kate was in his arms, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers for the first time in 14 months. They held each other without speaking, both of them crying openly as the reality of reunion washed over them. Kate breathed in his scent, different now but still fundamentally him, while William buried his face in her hair and whispered her name over and over like a mantra. "I missed you," Kate said against his shoulder, the words completely inadequate for the depth of longing she had experienced. "I missed you so much I thought I might die from it sometimes." "I know," William replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I missed you too. Every single day. There were moments when I thought about you so hard I could almost convince myself I could feel you with me." They eventually moved inside, William retrieving his bags from the porch with obvious reluctance to break physical contact with Kate even for a moment. In their living room, they sat close together on the couch, William's arm around Kate while she curled into his side, both of them marveling at being able to touch each other again. "The house looks amazing," William said, glancing around at the familiar space that somehow felt both exactly the same and subtly different. "And you look—" He paused, studying Kate's face with intense concentration. "You look beautiful, but also different. Stronger somehow." Kate felt a flush of pride at his observation. "I've changed," she admitted. "These months without you were the hardest thing I've ever been through, but they also taught me things about myself I never knew. I learned that I could be okay on my own, even when I didn't want to be." William nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I can see it. There's something more confident about you, more settled. I'm proud of you, Kate. I know how hard this must have been." "Tell me about where you were," Kate said, wanting to understand his experience, even though she knew there would be things he couldn't or wouldn't share. "What was it like?" William was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently stroking her arm as he gathered his thoughts. "It was hard," he said finally. "Harder than I expected in some ways, easier in others. The work was challenging but important. The men I served with became like family. But every day, I carried the thought of coming home to you, and that got me through everything." He paused, and Kate sensed there were darker experiences he wasn't ready to discuss yet. That was okay. She had learned patience during their separation, had discovered that love sometimes meant waiting for someone to be ready to share, rather than demanding immediate intimacy. "I wrote you a letter every day," William continued. "Even when I couldn't send them, I wrote them. I have a whole notebook full of things I wanted to tell you, thoughts I had about our life together, plans for when I came home." Kate felt her heart swell with love and amazement. "I kept a journal too," she said. "I wrote about what I was learning, about how I was changing, about all my dreams for our future. I wanted to have something to share with you when you got back. A record of how I grew while you were away." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, sharing stories and experiences from their time apart while rediscovering the rhythm of being together. Kate showed William through the house, pointing out small changes she had made and new additions to their belongings. In the bedroom, she opened her closet to reveal several new dresses and explained her decision to update her wardrobe as part of her journey toward greater independence. William shared some of his letters with Kate, reading aloud passages about missing their morning coffee routine and wondering what she was doing at specific moments. His voice broke when he read about a particularly difficult day when only thoughts of her had kept him going, and Kate held his hand tightly, wishing she could have been there to comfort him in person. When evening came, they cooked dinner together for the first time in over a year. Kate had planned an elaborate meal to mark the occasion, but they ended up making simple grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup because William mentioned craving comfort food, and Kate realized that being together was more important than any fancy menu. They ate at their kitchen table, the same table where they had shared their last breakfast 14 months earlier, but everything felt new and precious. After dinner, they walked through their neighborhood, William marveling at small changes that had occurred during his absence and Kate pointing out new neighbors and community developments. They stopped at the community center, where several staff members and volunteers rushed to welcome William home. Kate watched with pride as William graciously accepted their thanks for his service, while also asking detailed questions about programs and people he had missed. Mrs. Henderson pulled Kate aside during their visit. "He looks good," she said quietly. "Different, but good. And you look wonderful too, dear. I've been so proud watching you bloom this past year. You've become quite the leader around here." That comment stayed with Kate as they walked home through the familiar streets. She had indeed become a leader during William's absence, taking on responsibilities and making decisions with confidence she hadn't possessed before. The question now was how to integrate this new version of herself with her role as William's partner and eventual wife. That night, they lay in their bed together for the first time since his departure, both of them almost afraid to believe it was real. Kate had wondered if being physically close again would feel awkward after so much time apart. But William's presence beside her felt as natural as breathing. They talked quietly in the darkness, sharing hopes and fears about rebuilding their relationship and planning their future. "I want to hear about your promotion," William said, his fingers intertwined with hers under the covers. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned that you're head of the art department now. Tell me how that happened." Kate launched into the story of the previous principal's retirement and how she had stepped up to propose new programming that had impressed the school board. As she spoke, she realized how much her confidence had grown through taking on leadership responsibilities. She had advocated for her ideas, managed budgets, and supervised other teachers, all skills she might never have developed if she had remained in William's supportive but protective shadow. "I'm incredibly proud of you," William said when she finished. "I always knew you were capable of amazing things, but I'm glad you got to discover that for yourself." The next few weeks were a careful dance of rediscovering each other while honoring the growth they had both experienced during their separation. William struggled initially with civilian routines after months of military structure, sometimes waking in the night with startled confusion about where he was. Kate learned to give him space when he needed to process difficult memories while also being available when he was ready to share. They both noticed that they were different people than they had been when William left. Kate was more independent and confident, comfortable making decisions and expressing opinions without seeking constant validation. William seemed more serious, more aware of life's fragility and the importance of appreciating everyday moments. Instead of trying to return to their old patterns, they consciously worked to build new ones that honored who they had become. The wedding planning that had been a distant dream during William's deployment suddenly became an immediate and joyful reality. They spent evenings looking through magazines and visiting venues, making decisions together but also respecting each other's individual preferences in ways that felt more mature and equal than their pre-deployment relationship. Kate chose to wear her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit her new confidence and style. William surprised her by learning to dance properly, taking lessons at the community center while she was at work so he could sweep her off her feet at their reception. They decided on a small ceremony in the garden they had created together, surrounded by the flowers Kate had tended during William's absence and the friends who had supported them both through their time apart. 3 months after William's return, on a perfect Saturday in late spring when their garden was in full bloom, Kate and William were married in their backyard with 50 of their closest friends and family members in attendance. Kate walked down an aisle bordered by the roses she had planted while missing William, wearing her grandmother's dress and her own radiant smile. William waited for her under an arch they had built together from branches of the oak tree where they had shared their first kiss. The ceremony was simple, but deeply moving, with vows they had written themselves that spoke not only of their love, but also of what they had learned during their separation about strength, independence, and commitment. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared tasted of joy and tears, and the profound relief of having survived the hardest test their relationship had ever faced. At the reception, held in the community center where they had first met, William's commanding officer gave a speech about the courage required not only for military service, but also for maintaining loving relationships despite the demands of duty. Kate's students presented them with a handmade quilt featuring painted squares that told the story of their courtship and separation and reunion. During their first dance, William whispered in Kate's ear about how proud he was of the woman she had become. Kate responded by telling him that their time apart had taught her that real love wasn't about needing someone, but about choosing to build a life with them from a place of strength rather than fear. The evening was perfect, filled with laughter and dancing and heartfelt toasts from people who had supported them through both the good times and the difficult period of separation. But the most meaningful moment for both Kate and William came late in the evening when they stepped outside for a quiet moment alone in their garden. Standing among the flowers that had grown and bloomed during William's absence, surrounded by the gentle sounds of their wedding celebration, they reflected on how far they had come from that heartbreaking morning when he had driven away with tears in his eyes and uncertainty in both their hearts. "We made it," Kate said softly, her arms around William's neck as they swayed together without music. "We did more than make it," William replied, pulling her closer. "We became better, stronger, more ready for whatever comes next." Kate looked into his eyes, seeing not just the love that had always been there, but also a new appreciation for what they had built together and separately. Their quiet goodbye 14 months earlier had nearly broken both their hearts, but it had also set them on paths of individual growth that had ultimately made their reunion even more meaningful. They had learned that love could survive separation, that individuals could maintain their own identities within a committed relationship, and that sometimes the hardest challenges led to the greatest rewards. As they kissed under the stars in their garden, Kate and William both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they were ready to face them together as two complete people who had chosen to share their lives. The little house on Maple Street had witnessed their innocent beginning, their heartbreaking goodbye, and now their joyful reunion. It would continue to shelter their love as they built the future they had dreamed about during all those lonely months apart. A future that was now even brighter because they had both discovered their individual strength and brought that strength to their partnership. Their story of separation and reunion would become part of the community's folklore, told to other military couples facing deployment and to anyone who doubted that love could survive long periods of separation. But for Kate and William, it was simply the foundation story of their marriage, the difficult beginning that had taught them how to love each other completely while remaining complete themselves. Years later, when they had children of their own and faced new challenges together, they would look back on those 14 months of separation not as the worst time in their relationship, but as the experience that had prepared them for a lifetime of facing difficulties as a team. The quiet goodbye that had been so hard to watch had ultimately led to a love story that was even more beautiful for having been tested by time and distance and found strong enough to endure.